Having trouble with some nightmare bosses? Well, let's figure out how to beat them. We're going to start out right here with the Scene 0 nightmare boss. We're going to then actually go all the way to the Blessed Witch and the Witch of Good Fortune later, and then Walpurgisnacht for Magia record later, so that's a bunch of stuff in this video. But for now, this is going to be the easiest one, and it's only going to go up and up in difficulty from here. But the Scene 0 nightmare boss has a gimmick that is extremely easy to take advantage of, and this is the following. You will see a stack counter next to the boss's health bar that goes all the way up to 10. Now, each time the boss takes a turn, it will gain a stack, and this stack will do the following. It will make the boss faster, and it will increase the break gauge reduction resistance of the boss, meaning that as each turn passes and the boss gains more stacks, he will not only be faster, but he'll also have his break bar go down by less and less each time. Now, the way to counter this is to simply break the boss, because whenever you break the boss, it actually removes 3 of those stacks. But that means that if we can break the boss within about 3 to 4 turns each time and keep those stacks at 0, hopefully, that means the boss will be very slow and we can keep breaking very fast. Now, how dangerous is the boss? Well, it turns out the boss is not actually very dangerous, because the boss deals a very low amount of damage, even to characters that are not of the correct elements, being Aqua and Light. And one way, however, that the boss is trying to kill you, though, is that its main damaging ability gets stronger every few turns. However, it doesn't get stronger that quickly, and I've made here a team only of low rarity 4-star characters, and yes, Lux Madoka basically counts as a 4-star character, and I have 3 breakers right here. A buffer that mainly gives me some speed, because Rico gives up to 10% speed and to the entire party, with a passive effect, and that passive effect, because it comes from an ability, cannot be removed by buff removal that the boss uses, by the way. And then I only have a single healer that doesn't actually heal very much, only sometimes we'll have to use like a single skill every 5 turns or something, and then sometimes special, but for the most part this healer doesn't actually have to do much, but I still need to have one to just exist and be there. So you'll see that even though I have a 4-star low rarity team, the boss is not actually able to deal much damage to me, and I am actually, with these 3 breakers and the speed buff from Rico, I am actually able to break the boss within these 3 turns every single time. And in order to make that more easy, I have made sure that when the boss is broken, I don't actually spend any specials. In fact, when the boss is broken, I'm not actually dealing damage or anything, I'm just trying to get my specials back, so that when the boss then wakes up and comes out of the break, I can then immediately throw a bunch of specials at the boss's face and immediately break the boss again. So by using this cycle, I'm able to just repeatedly keep breaking the boss doesn't get many turns, the boss doesn't get very powerful, the boss doesn't get very fast, and the boss can keep getting broken very quickly. And overall, you see the boss can't really do anything, and so this is one of those bosses, those nightmare bosses, that if you go into this fight not doing any specific strategy, it may seem difficult at first if your team just isn't well built to actually take advantage of the boss's weakness, but then once you have a team that can completely counter the boss's abilities, it just kind of falls over and can't do anything. This is something that won't be true for every boss that we're going to talk about today, but at least for this specific boss, yes, you can counter this boss very easily. Also, something I want to mention is, yes, I've made a team of low rarity characters, but you don't need to make the same team. You can have a similar type of team where you just have higher rarity units. For example, you can use an Iroha for breaking, you can use a Rena for breaking, you can use a Pluvia Madoka for breaking, and you can either still have 3 breakers and have one of those be one of these 5-star units I mentioned, or you can try a double breaker combo with 2 5-star breakers, for example. But you can also use, of course, a 5-star buffer, a 5-star debuffer if you want, or a 5-star healer, 5-star defender, etc. But just generally this type of strategy where you just keep breaking the boss within 3 turns at least to keep the boss's stacks at 0, if you have this general strategy, the boss can't do anything. For our next boss, we're going to take a look at the Blessed Witch, also known as just Eve, and I have put here together a team that once again uses some low rarity characters. I have a 5-star attacker and a 5-star debuffer, but this debuffer didn't really have to do much. I basically just put a debuff here because I wanted to show you something for this boss. Now, this boss works the following way. This version of Eve simply tries to get stronger with each turn, because every single turn that passes, it gains a passive attack, defense, and speed buff. And because it gains it passively, that means it cannot be removed with buff removal, sadly. And also, every 3 turns, it will reduce your MP by quite a large amount. Now, because the boss gets stronger and stronger and stronger every turn, that means you want to break it as fast as possible. And already, because the boss is both weak to Dark and Aqua, that means if you have a Rina, you're already looking extremely good, because you can just put in Rina and then use a Hazuki to keep giving more turns to the Rina, or even a Mabayu if you have her, and that will just immediately trivialize this entire fight, and you shouldn't even be having to watch this video, at least for this segment right here, if you have Rina on your account. That said, what else does the boss do? Well, the boss doesn't actually do that much outside of that. It can try to remove your buffs, it can give you curse, it can stun you, but for the most part, the boss is just trying to annoy you until the boss gets stronger. And then when the boss gets stronger, when it has a few stacks, then it will actually start to hurt really, really badly. But at the very beginning of the fight, the boss can't really do that much. So there is one other important thing about this fight, and that is that the big scary attack that the boss has does bonus damage to you depending on how many buffs you have. And once again, we're talking about buffs. We're talking about buffs that don't come from passive effects like abilities. We're talking about buffs that are actively created from things like skills, for example, or specials. Now, because the boss does bonus damage to you if you have buffs, you don't want to use buffs, and that's why I put a debuffer on here just to show off. If you have a debuffer, use a debuffer, because of course you can use debuffs still on the boss, because debuffers don't buff your party, and therefore it is incentivizing you to use more debuffers. Since the boss doesn't get stronger with debuffs, the boss only gets stronger if you use buffs. So you basically just want to use a breaker, and I do use a buffer, but mostly for action bounce, but generally you want to try to invest more into debuffers if possible, because those don't get punished as much by the boss. Now, for the most part, the way the actual strategy that I've cooked up here is, like I said, the Tsukasa here is only to showcase the debuffing part, but doesn't really do actually that much. The most important part really is that your breaker tries to break as fast as possible. Because, and this is something that you notice once the boss actually gets broken, the boss doesn't have any amount of HP at all, and so once the boss is broken, the boss immediately dies, and the boss just immediately falls over as soon as it's broken. So Mayatsu, even though she's A5 and has really good Crystallis, actually she only has 1 Crystallis, she doesn't actually need to do much. She just looks at the boss funnily and the boss just falls over. So even though she's A5, if she was A0, this would look very similar, because the boss just, like I said, doesn't have much HP. And a Hazuki, if you brought a Hazuki to break the boss fast, the Hazuki can also increase the damage of the attacker and make it much more likely that you immediately kill the boss. And because of that, Hazuki generally is great here, because even though she provides buffs, her being able to push breakers forwards means you can break really, really fast. You can even do double breaker, because like I said, the boss has very little HP, so it's possible. I'm not going to say it's going to be easy, but it might be possible for you to kill the boss even without an attacker by using 2 breakers. And your healer, in this case, the Rita that I brought, doesn't actually need to do very much. She only needs to heal once or twice throughout the entire fight, just to make sure that I actually get to the break. But you can see that the break happens very early in the fight, simply because Hazuki plus breaker means very fast breaking, even though I use a 4-star breaker. But if you have a 5-star breaker, like I said, specifically Arena, this boss breaks really, really fast, and just having a Hazuki give her a bunch of turns will make this fight very easy, and overall one of the easier fights that I'm going to talk about today. But it's also sadly the last easy fight that I'm going to talk about. The next 2 fights are a little bit different, are a little bit more difficult. Let's get to them. The second form of Eve, also known as the Witch of Good Fortune, is a lot different than her first form, but there is still some parts that are similar. The first part is that every single passing turn, she will gain both more attack and more speed, which means that the longer the fight goes on, the more deadly this fight will become. Now, the boss also loses defense each turn that passes, but this part won't really matter that much. The most important part is that because the witch does so much more damage the more turns pass, you have to kill the boss as fast as possible. And this is your number 1 goal. That said, the boss does a lot more damage than it did in the first form, so now staying alive is going to be a lot more difficult. Secondly, the boss has lost its gimmick of punishing you for having buffs on you, so that part no longer applies. Instead, the boss will do something else. The boss is now going to try to punish you for not having characters that are either light or dark. So you see, the boss is weak to light and dark, meaning that you probably should use light and dark characters, because you always gain bonuses against bosses by having the correct element, meaning you do more damage and you take less damage if you're of the correct element. But in this case, the boss tries to punish you even harder if you don't have those elements by at one point giving itself a buff that greatly increases the amount of damage that it does to all of the elements it's strong against, being Flame, Aqua, Forest, and Void, meaning it's when it gives itself this buff, it's very likely to kill all of your characters that are not either light or dark. And it's also at the same time giving you an MP recovery rate debuff, so it makes you gain less MP. But this debuff is stronger if you're once again not of the correct elements. So if you're either Flame, Aqua, Forest, or Void, this debuff will be even more powerful and you'll gain basically no MP for 1 or 2 turns. So on top of that, it also gives itself a buff where sometimes it will have a buff that greatly increases its resistance to break gauge depletion, meaning now while it has this buff, you can basically no longer reduce its break bar for about 1 turn. Now if you combine all of this, it means that you are supposed to kill the boss very quickly, but you have to do it with light and dark characters. While the boss gets very dangerous very quickly, even after just 2-3 turns, the boss is almost ready to one-shot you and is extremely deadly. And this altogether makes this fight so difficult. So sadly I wasn't able to cook up a complete low rarity, low investment strategy for this, but I can give you some pointers. The most important pointer that I can give you is the fact that once again Hazuki, as always, is extremely powerful, and specifically if you have Iroha. You are making this fight so much easier for yourself, because Iroha is the absolute star in this fight. Let me rewind back to the start of this battle, and we will see at the start of this battle I'm going to do the following. I'm going to give as many turns as possible to my Iroha with Hazuki, and my Iroha will keep using her skill and her special whenever she can, because Iroha gives herself a buff to her own crit rate, and then when she crits, she gives herself a buff that increases break gauge depletion. And with this buff, she actually does a lot of break gauge reduction to the enemy. Now, you might think that you need to build crit rate on her, which, yeah, if you're using Crystallis, you should put some crit rate on her, give her EX Crystallis if possible, but you don't need other characters on your team that buff crit rate most of the time, because if you get unlucky, you can just restart the battle and it's not going to be that bad. But she does have about 60% crit rate just herself with the buff, so it's okay. But with her buff and with her getting more turns from Hazuki, she actually does so much break gauge reduction that she can break the boss before the boss's 4th turn attack happens. Now why is that important? Because on the 4th turn is where the boss is going to try to one-shot you. The boss will buff its own damage, and then it will use a mega big hit. And in most cases, if you don't have a strong defender, that big hit on turn 4 will kill you. So Iroha, with Hazuki being able to break before that, is really good. Now there's a little bit of a hurdle that happens until then, and this is the following. On turn 3, the boss will give itself the break gauge reduction resistance buff that you're seeing right now on screen, and because of this would make the break much slower. And the slower the break is, the stronger the boss gets. So I need to remove this buff. This is why I brought an Aya with me, but if you have a Tsukasa, of course you can also use a Tsukasa much better, but Ayame also does it, so I immediately remove this buff, so then I can keep breaking with Iroha. And I also brought a Rika to give more MP and more speed, because that's also nice for faster breaking. And you can see that it's not actually that difficult to break the boss before the big hit happens. But I also need to mention my Iroha is not A3. Because at A3, you actually gain faster breaking. Now, why is this important? Is because breakers, they do more break gauge damage if they have higher skill levels, which also applies to their special. So their special also does more break damage if it has a higher special level. And at Ascension 3 and Ascension 5, you get to increase the level of your special. So the fact that my Iroha is not Ascension 3 and it's actually lower than Ascension 3, that means that this Iroha is quite weak. And this is good for the showcase because it means I'm showcasing right now, you can still get this break at this exact moment even without her having high Ascension. But if you have high Ascension, she actually breaks faster. Now this is a very important part, so I want to actually hold on to this moment right here, because this is going to make and break the fight. This is the point in the fight where I'm figuring out exactly when I'm going to break the boss, and I know that turn 4 is about to happen because you see the boss has 3 stacks. Now in turn 4, the boss will buff itself, and then immediately afterwards, do the big hit. And there's a bit of a trick here that I've mentioned in another video before, where I talk about, I think, like 20 advanced tips you don't know about Magia, etc., whatever I call it. And that is that you can get the most amount of break gauge, like break pushback on the enemy's turn if you break the boss in between its actions. So right here, the boss is going to start one of its actions, and then I'm going to break it in between those actions. And this is a very interesting thing that happens here. So now I'm going to get the maximum pushback, but it also cancels the boss's second attack. So it first buffs itself with damage up, and then it tries to kill you. But its attack of it trying to kill you gets cancelled by the fact that I'm breaking it in between. And this is a perfect time to use this little trick. So by breaking it in between those two actions, now, even though it's giving itself the buffs, I'm cancelling that second thing like I'm a Twitter user. So now it's cancelled, it can no longer use its second attack, and it will have to then do something else next turn. And now I got the maximum pushback, and here comes the point where this try sadly falls apart, because I'm missing a character and I also don't have enough damage. And which is why this is sadly not a video of an actual kill, but generally the idea that I want to show off, even if you don't have Irohan, you have some other breaker, if you can hit this timing is absolutely perfect. So now the idea is that you want to kill the boss before the boss comes out of break, which if you have Homura or Madokami, hopefully you can do. If you don't have Homura or Madokami, it might get very dangerous, because the boss of course is resistant to anything that isn't light or dark, so sadly Mayachio can't quite do it. I also don't have 5-star supports with me, so maybe someone like a Mabayu would have been much better. So if I had like a Mabayu or maybe even a debuffer like Ren, that would have made it very easy, I think, in this case, to actually kill the boss. But because I only have 4-star supports, I can't actually kill the boss with this Ryachio, sadly. But, and this is where another strategy comes in, what if you don't have Homura and Madokami, but you would still like to kill the boss? Well, what if you have a good defender? So here I have another fight that sadly didn't quite go as planned because I had bad RNG and I didn't want to re-record it, I'm sorry. But if you have a good defender, like I have an A4 Kirika, then you can actually basically play a similar strategy. But now with the added benefit of an A4 defender, specifically a Kirika who slows the boss and gives you more time and also weakens the boss's attack, you can actually survive more of the boss's attacks and get to a second break. But don't play longer than a second break. I don't think you can really survive after a second break anymore because the boss will have too many stacks. So this is the general strategy, is that you try to break the boss as fast as possible by having a breaker that gets action advance from Hazuki, or double turns from Mabayu also works perfectly. Or if you have speed buffers like Mami, like Moemura, they're sadly off element, but like I said, if you break the boss in between those two attacks on turn 4, the boss doesn't get to do its big hit, and then together with a strong defender, you're able to survive those hits and keep yourself alive for just long enough to get at least 1 or 2 breaks before everything falls apart. Like I said, I can't give you an exact strategy because I wasn't actually able to kill the boss with only 4-star and low investment units, but you can see the general strategy that is forming here of trying to be as fast as possible. Do not do double sustain. Double sustain is a terrible idea because the boss will get way too powerful. You have to go all out, absolute all out, as fast as possible as you can break. That's basically the main idea. Break as fast as possible and then punish the boss immediately. If you have Homura, use Homura and kill the boss in a single break if you can. So that's basically the main idea here. And hopefully that was able to help you out at least a little bit. But other than that, if you don't have a strong attacker in this case, if you don't have a strong breaker and you don't have Iroha, for example, and you don't have a strong defender who can survive this, and you can't play a variation of these strategies, that I have to throw out there that you don't have to beat Nightmare right now, and there's like no difference to if you beat Nightmare right now or if you beat it like half a year from now, like nothing happens. There's really no rush to do it, and you can just come back later if you have a stronger team, if your team has higher level, if you have other characters, it's fine. There's absolutely no reason that you have to do it right now. And that's also something I want to say, because the next boss is even harder to do with low investment, sadly. So yeah, let's get to the actual final boss of this chapter. So here we have the actual final boss of this chapter, which, like I said, I won't have a good low rarity strat for you. So this is a refight with Walpurgisnacht, but this refight is quite different than her first fight, and is much more difficult than her first fight. So the idea behind this fight is the following. The boss has a really, really long break bar that takes a really long time to get through, but once you break the boss goes all the way up to a multiplier of 999%. And in most cases, if you just have an attacker and like at least one buffer next to them that's still alive at that point, you can probably kill the boss at that point. Because the boss will just take so much damage from an attacker that it just falls over. Especially if that attacker is either light or dark type. So if you have Madokami, maybe even Oriko, or if you have maybe even a Holy, I don't know, but definitely a Homura, this boss should just fall over once it gets broken. But getting there is quite difficult. You see a stack marker next to the boss's HP bar that goes all the way up to 99. So what does this do? Every single time the boss takes a turn, this will increase by 1, and every single stack decreases your entire team's defense, speed, and MP recovery rate by 1%. So yeah, this goes up to basically 100%, meaning you can't do anything, you can't take any turns, and you just immediately fall over and die. So once again, we have to kill the boss as fast as possible before this gets too difficult. Even if the boss has just 10 stacks, it's already extremely deadly at that point. So we really can't be screwing around. Once again, we have to break the boss as fast as possible, and then once we break the boss, we hopefully just win at that point. Now the boss sadly has a lot longer of a break bar than the boss before this. I think it's about 3 to 4 times as long as the break bar on the boss before this, so we have to do a lot of breaking. So how do we survive for that long? Well, the boss has a lot of attacks. A lot of them are very similar to the ones that Walpurgisnacht used before, but there are some slight variations. The boss still has its big main ultimate attack, where it does like the special cutscene that looks like a special animation, and this attack is extremely important that you know how to counter it, because it does a fixed HP percentage damage. I think it's about 90% of your current HP. This means that no matter how much HP you have, at the end of that attack, everyone will be at extremely low HP, maybe even 1 HP, because of how much percent damage it will do to you, but I don't think it can kill you. I think it can at most put you on 1 HP as far as I know. So it will look extremely scary, and this is why it can be very important to have a healer, because if you have a defender, this damage actually goes past barriers and makes barriers useless, so you will still take all of that damage and still drop to like 1 HP. So if you have a healer, you can then use a healer to use their special. Now this, I'm not quite sure exactly when this happens. You should try to get a feeling for this when you play this yourself, where you put a healer on your team and you have the healer not use their special after about 3 to 4 turns and have them wait basically for the actual big mega attack to happen. And then as soon as the attack comes in, you can have the healer immediately use their special to get everyone back up for the following turns. Outside of that big mega scary hit, the boss won't do that much, except it will keep repeatedly poking you with bouts of damage here and there, while having various special effects attached to that. For example, it will try to decrease your speed, and this speed decrease is stronger if you're not light or dark, similar to what we saw with the Eve fight before this, where it tries to punish you for being of the wrong elements. So if you're either flame, aqua, forest, or void, you get a stronger speed down. On top of that, you will also get an action pushback on you that's also stronger if you are not of the correct elements. And right here we see the boss, yeah, it's doing it on turn 4, where it's doing one of the action order down effect that is stronger if you're not of the correct element, and then immediately you see the special animation right here. That's the big mega scary attack. Everyone drops really low HP, but I got my Kaede already lined up to use a healing special on top of that to get everyone back up to a better HP. This is the main scary part, I would say, about this fight, is that you have a healer special ready when the stack counter reaches 3, because that's when the next big hit happens. Apart from that, the boss will also remove its own buffs and also remove its own debuffs and remove your buffs. And the boss will give itself an action order advance that is stronger if it currently has a shield on you, and yes, of course, it will also give itself shield. So if you see the shields, try to actually get rid of those shields, but it has about 6 stacks. And you only have a couple of turns to actually get rid of those stacks. So having characters have their special ready at that point, I think she does it at around turn 2, where she tries to give herself some shields. So if you have the ability to get rid of those shields at that point, buff removal would work, but you can also just have characters that are either fast, or have characters that have multi-hit like Sunsu Saika or Sunsu Mami, or you can have people with their special ready to get bonus hits. You can have follow-up attacks like Ren, for example, and that would go through those shields very quickly. So there's many ways of getting through those shields so the action advance isn't too strong, but then again, the action advance itself is not that dangerous. What's more dangerous is the fact that the boss will just keep doing a lots of damage and increasing amounts of more damage to you. So for example, this big hit right here, I have an A4 defender. And she has her EX Crystallis, which actually gives more defense if you are at full HP. And despite all of that defense and all of that damage reduction and all of that on top of that, my Moemura still took damage to her HP bar, which doesn't sound like anything, but that means that this hit was so powerful that if I didn't have a defender there, this would have like almost killed her from full HP. Like, this is an insane amount of damage that the boss is throwing at you, so you could do double sustain, like a defender and a healer. But the problem with that is that you still have to break the boss rather quickly, because otherwise the boss gets too strong. Not to mention that if you use 2 sustains, even though the boss takes like 1000% extra damage when the boss is broken, the boss isn't broken for that long, so you can't be dawdling around for too long, so you can't actually play this fight too slowly. Like, I don't have an attacker, but I have a lot of other stuff on my team that makes me get many turns. But generally it gets very difficult to slot in more characters if you're running double sustain. So you could try a healer plus only characters that are of the correct elements. But you know, this is where I'm getting to, where I'm saying I couldn't give you a low rarity fight for this, because the restriction of needing a good healer that doesn't immediately die, plus an entire team of light and dark characters that can also break really fast and don't immediately die from the boss's big XL attacks, but also break the boss fast enough before the boss gets too dangerous. All of that isn't really possible with just low rarity and low investment characters. But generally, I would say, once again, Hazuki plus Iroha combo, very good. I didn't do it here. I have another fight where I tried it and actually went much better. But the idea is generally, once again, Hazuki plus Iroha or Hazuki plus Pluvia, or even Iroha and Pluvia, both of them, works fantastic here. Absolutely goated. You should probably use all those characters if you have them. Mabi on top of that as well. Mabi, you giving bonus turns once again to your Iroha, to your Pluvia if you have them. And if you have Homura, of course, absolutely use Homura. Generally, if you have Iroha and Homura, all of these bosses that I said are very difficult aren't actually difficult at all and actually fall over very easily. And if you make sure to keep a healer special ready, the boss can get broken somewhat quickly, at least, with all of the bonus turns you can get from Hazuki or Mabayu on your breaker. And then once the boss breaks, you have to, of course, kill it within that break, because you're not going to be able to probably survive until a second break. So this means that you sort of have to use higher investment characters to be able to satisfy all of those needs that I've just mentioned. But outside of that, the boss is not very complicated. It just requires you to have a certain minimum level of investment, basically. But also, this is the kind of boss where once your characters gain higher magic level, and they gain more HP and more defense, specifically more HP and more defense, so that they can actually survive a couple of hits from the boss, it's gonna make this fight so much easier. So even if you can't kill the boss now, come back in like 1 or 2 months, even with the same characters, and they might have so much more HP and defense that they actually just don't die anymore. So this is at least the upside of this fight, that this fight becomes a lot easier once the characters have a bunch more HP and defense to survive a little bit. So even though it might be a little bit of pill that you need some characters that can actually, like I said, survive long enough and also break the boss fast enough at the same time, and then still have enough damage left in the tank to kill the boss, this is also a boss that gets easier the longer the game has been out for, and there's no rush to kill the boss right now. You don't have to kill the boss right now at all. It's fine. You can wait a little time. It's fine. But that was that. I hope you guys enjoyed this. Hit that subscribe button, ring the bell, become a member today, and as always, shout outs to my members Rip van Winkel and Simpletor. See you guys next time.